This is Infants on Thrones, the philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the Quorum.
This is Infants on Thrones. I'm Matt Long. And on this episode, Kristin, Tom, and I are going to talk about shame. Shame's a topic I've been thinking about for a long time. It's a topic I've particularly been thinking about over the last few months as we've been having harder conversations, topics about Sam Young, tone, respect, the ex-Mormon community generally, and really just life. I'm an incredibly flawed man, but I'm constantly working, constantly trying to figure out this labyrinth, this maze, and I fail a lot. But just like all of us, I'm a work in progress. And some of the best times I've had is progressing by talking to the other infants, by listening and reading the comments of our good listeners. Over the last few episodes, I've thrown some bombs at the ex-Mormon community, and that's been unfair. The listeners of this podcast, the people that comment, have become friends. And I treated that friendship really poorly. And for that, I'm sorry. And I want to make a public apology to Sam Young. My tone was wrong. The way that I treated him and the way that I condescended to him was shitty. And I expect better of myself. I have no excuse. I have no justification. I simply treated a good man in a way he didn't deserve to be treated. And for that, I'm sorry to Sam, and sorry to our listeners. I want to be better. I want to be more effective. And I will be kinder to the people that I talk to. And so, I'm just going to try to do it. I want to thank all the listeners who've listened to the things that I've had to say in the past, have thought that they've been worthy to listen to and worthy to comment on. You all have been the best part of my journey so far, and I'll never shit on that again. So I give you a conversation about shame.
I like it.
As I was thinking about it, it's like, okay, now I can be all explain what's going on, because there's, in this cycle of victimology, there's shared responsibility, which leads to concealment, right? So we'll talk about shared responsibility, because that's, that really relates to, that right there. And as I was thinking about it more, I realized, that's the real issue with shared responsibility is shame, and different types of shame that people feel. And it's a problem that permeates society, and it permeates us. And so the reason why I really wanted to talk about sexual abuse, so the reason why I wanted to start talking about sexual abuse anyway wasn't just to educate people about sexual abuse. It was to educate people about their own traumas. The reason why I understand trauma, my own trauma, despite not being sexually abused, is because I really, really understood sexual abuse.
You talking about trauma in the broad sense?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Wow.
Sexual abuse is simply another form of trauma. And we
So you don't necessarily rate trauma, right?
No.
Because sexual trauma usually is equated with like the worst kind of trauma.
And it is. And that's why we can understand our own traumas particularly well if we can understand the traumas that are very easy to identify, like sexual abuse, like physical abuse, like, famine. And, if you don't know when, poverty, physical failings, we understand those burdens that come with those traumas. And in many ways, because we understand those traumas, or at least those are so evident, we misidentify the same manifestations that in us. So, for example, shame is certainly a great example. There are aspects of shame that lead to how about this? So, post-traumatic or shame is experiences of shame are sometimes or are often intersected with trauma response and especially trauma memory, which we're essentially talking about PTSD. So it has some of the same effects, physiological effects, emotional effects as traumas, but we all experience them, right? When we're talking about traumas, we're talking about things like betrayal, which lead to lack of trust, lack of trust in people who we're to be intimate with, who are supposed to protect us, and that has an impact on us as people. So rather than talking about sexual abuse, I think we can talk about shame and instances of and the effects of shame on just people, on society. And in talking about that, we'll start highlighting other examples of shame that will be really evident. And so one of the examples I have that I want to get to eventually, once we get going, is chastity lessons, because shame is around sexuality particularly, because those are the things that we don't talk about. Even the positive things about sexuality, right? Where a woman, might feel shame for really, really, really liking to give her husband a blowjob. A healthy, positive. I'm happy you made that face, by the way, Kristin. Yeah,
we all are, ladies.
but that's another example of of shame. So it doesn't just have to be these obvious examples to have the same impact of lack of connection, lack of resiliency, and lack of love for ourselves, which is ultimately, I think, what we're trying to accomplish, and where our problems ultimately lie in not feeling comfortable in our own skin. And often, too often, shame is a big reason from that. And that's why, it's pop psychology started really, dealing with shame, and the Brene Browns and this. So I think it's a topic worth at least discussing and introducing. And then I think we'll see that there are real applications, not just in the sex abuse context, and there are, but in the education context, in the parenting context, and then in the interpersonal context of health and wellness. Because ultimately, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about sexual abuse. It's not necessarily just how to prevent sexual abuse, but how to increase resiliency in children, those who have been sexually abused, and those who haven't, including adults. So my discussions about these things really are about trying to arm people with tools of resiliency.
And I think tools of healing as well, which is resiliency, sort of. But as we discuss this, I like this idea. As we discuss these topics, then I think as people face them or realize, I have that, it can help heal.
Yeah, and it does come to self-awareness. And so anyway, that's why I want to talk about kind of shame, Tom, and that's why I gave you that broad topic, because I've thought of other times in the past where as infants we've done, the fear and guilt and, some of those topics. They were always my favorite discussions to have, because they allowed a lot more broad discussion that allowed us to kind of at least take up a little bit more space and explore the human condition rather than the Mormon or ex-Mormon condition.
Right. It's universal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And more relatable for all.
Yeah. And I think when we get there, we stop not talking about the issue, and we're actually talking about the issue. I am taking on a new role, and I'm stepping into doing, having other conversations and other, education opportunities. And I was planning on, just bailing on Infants on Thrones in order to take on, some of those projects and other things that are more, in the national and things outside of Mormonism.
Right.
And so and much of this was maybe it was kind of a little bit of bomb throwing at the ex-Mormon community and the ex-Mormon world generally, basically. And it was kind of like, yeah, fuck you. Maybe I am bigger than you all, kind of. I think there was probably an attitude of that.
Sure.
That was, very dismissive of the good listeners, the time that they spent investing in us and investing in me, and the things that have said over the course of the last 6 years. And I do feel in many ways I just shat on that. In talking about the issue, and not actually explaining, a deeper issue to demonstrate a depth of knowledge that can really be useful and therefore effective.
Wow.
What do you think, Tom?
Well, first of all, about the you shatting on ex-Mormons or whatever, I do think that you kind of threw that bomb out there. And I know personally that there are, friends of mine that are, quote, Matt fans, that they felt a little bit of bitterness to Matt saying, "Oh, fuck you guys." And of course, as a listener, they're going to take that personally. Like, Matt's saying this to me, not in a general sense, and not, in a not directed sort of way. So yeah, I guess I kind of see why the fans and the listeners would feel that way. So I can understand your concern there. To the shame stuff, I really want to kind of process that a little bit more, kind of dissect it to try to understand. Yeah, because I see where you're going in a sense, but I guess I just needed a little more dumbed down. I need a little more explanation as to where the shame comes from. We all feel shame in a broad sense, right? But not, and I guess that's what you're trying to hone in onto.
So let's get into it.
We all have shame on some level, and I guess, there's so many levels of it. There's so much shame that happens. Are we talking about even like embarrassment? Are we talking about worrying about what other people think? On that superficial sort of level, and then we get into the more deep level where we're publicly shamed, or if our parents scold us, or if like you said, if our spouse or partner does something to really ridicule us, and because then it gets more and more, and then obviously you get down into the depths where there's the sexual shame.
Yeah. So let's get into it. This is what we know about shame. Shame is ubiquitous. Shame is something we all deal with and that we all experience. And shame has real effects on our feelings of ourself, our feelings and connections to other people, and our ability to navigate our world in really healthy ways. And too often shame is unnecessary. And probably in most instances, it's unnecessary, and it's a product of our upbringing and the people we choose to associate with.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Yeah, man.
Is it, because you're kind of painting the picture of shame in a negative light. Is it strictly negative?
That's a question I had, dude. What do you think?
I think I think even if we want to get right down in the nitty gritty, I think there's actually a reason why we have embarrassment or shame, why we have these sort of triggers inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's something that was, innate in our genetics or biological or something like that. I think there's something to it. I don't know all the reasons why, but I do know there's probably something to it. But I mean, if we're feeling shame for whatever reason, and I'm automatically just going to like a public embarrassment sort of situation. I'm going back to my childhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm in a theater class and I'm wearing pantyhose and all my buddies are mocking me for wearing pantyhose.
Okay.
And like that was so shameful to me that I ran home from school and I didn't ever want to go back. Like, and that memory's so vivid to me because it was like this little weird traumatic experience. It's so silly in hindsight, right?
Yeah.
But at the time it was just too much to bear and too much to handle. But I don't know. I lean towards that shame is 80-90% bad. But I actually wonder, it makes me kind of offer a little bit of a counter to it. Like, well, maybe there's something good that it provides too. I don't know right off the surface what it might be, but I think there might be something there.
So I know when you first asked that, I was like, I think it's all negative. When I feel shame, I feel that feels negative. But I think there could be a positive if your brain is one that uses it to self-reflect. Like you just did a brilliant job of earlier.
So if you're more of a self-aware sort of position, then you can use shame in a positive way.
So we could use shame, I think, yes, positively. But I feel shame is kind of negative. At least it's a negative feeling.
Yeah. So to me, shame is a negative thing. Just like there is no the tolerance is a virtue. And there's no such thing as being too tolerant. There's never a point where shame or where tolerance becomes a vice or a negative, right? This is kind of the religious approach of, it's good to be tolerant, but we must be careful to not be too tolerant, right? I think that virtues, that's not a real thing. I think at some point you're now calling something tolerance when it's not. Right. So I think shame's the same way. When we're talking about shame, it's a negative always, because shame has to do with self-blame, humiliation, fear of public scrutiny, not a boy, I felt regret for that and now want to change my behavior. That's not shame. Because that comes from a positive place of I think of kind of self-actualization, right? So for me, we're talking about, or not for me, I think it's important when we're talking about shame to not get into the pride problem. Okay, pride's a good thing. No, pride's a bad thing because this is what pride is. And no. Yeah. When we're talking about shame, we're talking about a psychological impact that has PTSD-like symptoms. So if you, there's studies out there that talk about how shame will have the same PTSD responses of like flashbacks, triggers, dwelling on things, right? Dwelling on the past in very negative, destructive, thought processes of, shame leads people to suicide. Shame leads people to destructive behaviors. So when we're talking about shame, we're talking about that type of a reaction that isn't one of, okay, well, you can hone it and use it to be positive. And I think shame is something that's just debilitating, and that is a negative, is a form of trauma.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I actually think that even with Brene Brown, and I don't know what your guys' position is on her. Yeah, I think she's fantastic. But when she talks about shame, she paints it in a very negative light. Now that I'm thinking back to it, I don't think she uses it in any sort of positive way. So I agree with you. I think that it is PTSD-like. It can be something where it puts on a level probably depending on what kind of shame it is, levels of trauma, right?
I agree. And as you were saying that, I was thinking.
Sorry, we didn't introduce you. Kristin's on this episode. We'll have to do an intro.
People know me.
Right.
No,
Kristin, tell everybody what you're an expert in. I'm just kidding.
I don't know which one to share. Let me tell you this. From a teacher standpoint, we avoid making children feel shameful at all because it will shut down. I mean, it shuts down their brain and their, in different ways instead of just teaching. And so that's right. It would be totally negative because you have no idea what this person's going to, I can't say, well, sometimes it's positive for me when no, it's really negative.
I think of, when especially with kids are so burdened, and they're burdened by fears and unknowns. And to me, shame is the same thing. It's a burden. And our goal in this life, I think, or at least my goal, is to find peace from a burdened mind. And some burdens you just have to deal with. They just exist because of the responsibilities and different things like that. But there's too many burdens that are just unnecessary that our minds are spending energy and emotional capital on. And shame is one of those that is such a strong reaction and is so persistent and cyclical that it's a burden that stays with someone days, years after experiencing shame.
Yeah.
So an example I have recently, there's a fantastic. So my rather than quoting a psychologist, I'm gonna quote the Shame Wizard from Big Mouth 2.
Oh, I haven't seen any
second
Big
season
Mouth
on Netflix. I really recommend it. So let me share this here.
Shame Wizard.
Shame Wizard. So they've got the hormone monster, which controls these kids are going through puberty.
Well, this is Nick Kroll, right?
Yeah, Nick Kroll and John Mulaney, and it's brilliant in how they deal with sexuality. And what I love is they deal with the hormone monster and all these horribly cringy sexual experiences, and then so naturally they bring up the shame wizard tied into sex, because really so often when we are talking about shame, we're talking about sexually related things. So here's the shame wizard.
Are you so mean? Well, tell me, how do you think humankind would look? Unrepentant of your every lurid sin, running carefree as you please, tits and willies to the breeze, indulging every hedonistic whim. Would you be happier? Maybe yes, but heavens, what a mess as you lie, cheat, scam and screw. That's why I'm here to steer you right and to shine a naked light on all the horrid things you do and fill you with shame, shame, making life just a little bit lame. A healthy dose of sweet self-loathing shame. This one is embarrassed that his balls have yet to drop, and this one is a skeevy little perv. This one's going Betty because she split up Mum and Daddy, and it's a punishment she's certain she deserves. Let's see, this one's a bedwetter, and that one's a dry humper, and this one is a lowly little queer. How I hate to be a bummer, but my dear, I've got your number, and I'll whisper it forever in your ear, bringing the shame, shame. You've got no one but yourself to blame. You thought no one was watching, but I'm right here in your brain. So if you start to burn too hot, I'll douse your filthy flame. Yeah, I'll come rushing in like a harsh judgmental friend to twist you from within with glorious shame.
So the shame wizard. But it is tied to too often to sexuality, and especially when we're talking about when we are talking about sexual abuse, and when people haven't experienced sexual abuse, the shame and the higher levels of shame, self-blame, humiliation, fear of public scrutiny, shared responsibility. Right, I was responsible. So some concepts, there's some other words to describe it. Right, there are a couple different types of shame variants, is what I've heard them called, and one has to do with self-blame or fear of being blamed, which I like quite a bit to think about. Is it's not just okay, it's my fault. It's someone else might think it's my fault. And that can be, in a lot of different contexts, especially for kids. And I always talk about kids because, I think the amount of these types of traumas that we that kids experience, that's what leads to less healthy adults and less ability to connect with oneself, which prevents people from connecting with other people, and particularly intimate partners, and their spouses and their children and their parents and other people. And a lot of it is tied into these different things. So self-blame and fear of being blamed, humiliation, and fear of public scrutiny. Those are what I've read and kind of understand as being the three different types of reactions that people have. And I think it's really important in in any type of a victim component. I think it can be, whether you're being yelled at, whether you're feeling unfear, you're feeling when kids are feeling fearful in their home or other places for some reason, whether they're being berated in sports leagues or,
being bullied, right?
Being bullied.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of these things are manifest, and all of these things contribute to helplessness, contribute to silence, contribute to allowing those negative experiences, those traumatic experiences, to continue as well. So the shame is a component to a traumatic experience, because it's what prevents people from being able to either get access to resources to help them remove themselves from that traumatic experience, or remove that traumatic experience from their life, or for themselves being able to take action, because it's always this. So there's I think that's the interplay, or that is the interplay between a very traumatic experience and the shame that accompanies it. And the more that our kind of cultural trained ways, whatever we have, it contributes to the different types of shame. So for example, men experience shame a little differently. Things that I've heard is, especially again, we're talking let's talk in a sexual abuse context. You have the self-blame, fear of being blamed. That's the deserving victim, right? Well, what did I do to contribute this? Bad girls did something to provoke or facilitate. What were you wearing? What were you drinking? Why? Here are the things you could have done, right? And this is kind of the victim without power, the disempowered victim. But that's different than some of the cultural narratives of some of the men, which is, real men are powerful. They're not victims. They have, and men will feel failed in their masculine duty to defend themselves. And so there's a component of shame there.
Are you talking about victim blaming as a form of shame?
Well, that certainly contributes to it, but this already exists internally. So when we talk about victim blaming, we start with the victim blaming themselves in these ways through shame.
Right.
I contributed. I could have done this differently.
I shouldn't have been wearing that dress.
Sure. That's already happening. And then it's reinforced by our cultural narratives, which only compounds that shame, which causes that person to say, oh my gosh, my fear, my self-shame is now being made manifest based on what I've heard these people say, based on what I've seen on TV, based on what my teacher says, based on what my dad says, based on all these people in my life who are safe are reinforcing the feelings that I'm feeling, which are, oh my gosh, it might be my fault And the result is silence. The result is fear. The result is helplessness and continued cycle of trauma, shame, lack of resiliency. Another form, humiliation, the disgraced victim, right? This is, a woman is dirtied or defiled by the sexual violation. Are you going to tell your husband about this rape? Should, that conversation gets talked about. And again, that's a different form of shame. And again, different contexts is, real men are sexually dominant, and they don't get raped, for example, so there's a humiliation aspect to that. You got the fear of public scrutiny that I talked about, some of these are related, the defamed victim, good girls keep their sexual lives private. We don't talk about such things. These are private things to only be talked. These are secrets, right? The more that those concepts are not just introduced but permeated to a child, the more shame they're going to feel, and that's going to be reinforced by the very upbringing that they have.
Gosh, this is ringing really true, even about like growing up as a girl in. I remember being taught many times if it's your fault if, the way if you make a guy feel, or if, you make out too long, you have control over that kind of that feeling. Mm-hmm. I remember feeling a lot of shame even after just like making out for a while back then. So that really is ringing true that it is. And then you're right. It's something you don't want to talk about because that feeling, that's real.
Because you believed it, right, Kristin?
Yeah. So I like what Matt said though about that that shame and then that feeling of not being allowed to talk about it. Of course, people stay silent. And then it's like, who do I tell that would believe that it's not my fault? Because then you start feeling it's not my fault. Is it my fault? Like all those questions, you just have to figure it out in your own mind. And a lot of these are children that don't even have all those tools.
Yeah. Ugh. And then the shame does contribute to, basically traumatic memories. When we talk about PTSD, we talk about, intrusions. You can't focus because you're remembering the feelings of shame that are tied to the experience, the feelings of helplessness, the strong emotional avoidance of those feelings of, those not just the event, but the shame as well. You got hyperarousal that people experience, and disassociation and fragmented states of mind. So this shame does have the impact of truly burdening our minds to distract us from being able to be in the moment, right? Be in the now, because of dealing with, spending real mental energy on events that no longer exist. And the way that the longer that goes along, the more helpless someone feels and the less likely they are to tell about their experience.
Are you familiar with what's called flashbulb memories?
Flashbulb
events?
Not in that context. I'm not familiar with it.
I was reading, this was a while ago. I read it in some psychology journals, where a lot of psychologists and therapists will talk about flashbulb memories, which is essentially what happens. And this was why it's bringing up to my mind is when you're talking about these moments of shame, that when someone encounters something that's really traumatic, something deeply shameful, something very distressing or whatever, it creates in their mind where it's what they consider a flashbulb memory. So if you imagine like a flashbulb goes off, everything in the room is extremely highlighted. The sense of smell, the tastes, the shirts, the fabric, like everything's intensified because your memory's like taking this moment to take it all in, just this one moment, and then hyper sensitize every little detail. And then afterwards, you have, like you said, with this shame cycle, you hyper focus and hyper overanalyze that flashbulb moment to infinity. You're just going over and over and over and again.
Yeah.
The problem is memory is always fallible, right? So some of it can get corrupted, but for the most part, a lot of it is really vivid. Like I was just talking about that moment when I, in elementary school, and I go up in this theater thing. Like I can remember everything. I can remember the costumes. I can remember my friends. It was a weird little stupid memory and a weird little traumatic experience. But yeah, it was like my mind at that time said, we're going to soak in everything at this moment, and we're just going to stamp it, and we're going to keep it locked up, and it's going to be permanent. And it feels like it's always there. It's always in the back of your mind. You can access it in an instant, and it's very distressing. And a lot of times it can alter, your life and your characteristics from there on, because it becomes this anchor that you're carrying with you.
Yes. And like Matt said, it takes up so much brain space that it really does affect learning and ways you take in other experiences, because
sure. And so the way you just described that, I talk about that as episodic memory. Like you take an episode and you just have it, versus the other things that'll happen, other experiences that just kind of flow through and just get melded into the minutia of life, right? Those are called script memories, and that's it sounds different. Like you're reading from a script as if you're being coached, is what people think, right? But it's not. It's just that, we all deal. I talk about, we deal in our dramas. Everybody has their own dramas that they deal with, right? We have the scripts that we play in our lives. Okay. You go to school, you go to work, you go to church, and those experiences become so commonplace and so consistent that it's just, we ask somebody, what do you do at work? Well, I do this, and I do this, and I do this, and I do that. And if you try to pinpoint a very specific date, you really can't do that.
Yeah, it's in and out, just like that.
But you have some really event that stands out that
right.
That now imprints, as you were describing. You now have an episode that distinguishes it from your normal drama, the normal play that you kind of just flow through every day, the script that you've built for yourself. Now you're off script. This wasn't supposed to happen.
Like if you're in a car accident going to work or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm off script.
Yep. This is different.
Right? So you remember. But now the shame and other contributing factors can also lead to disassociation. So because of that shame and those feelings, your brain is very good at protecting itself, and your body's good at protecting itself. And one way that happens is to bury that memory, right? Avoid it. And it doesn't get buried completely. Sometimes it does, but really it can have the effect of absolutely staying with you. But that shame also has the effect of you doing everything to avoid thinking about that event, to avoid the shame, to remove the emotional reaction. And so that has its own impact as well. And often that does have the impact of keeping a kid quiet. Because when I talk about sexual abuse, when I talk about keeping kids quiet, I'm not really just talking about sexual abuse. I'm talking about all kids. Why are our kids not telling us when they're dealing with real world issues? It's the same manifestation. It's the same feelings of shame and not feeling secure with their parent to be able to disclose these instances of shame. And so that's when we talk about disclosure, right? The disclosure of a traumatic event, the disclosure of sexual abuse, the disclosure of a rape, the disclosure of physical abuse, of a domestic violence relationship. Shame is certainly tied directly to that. But we have to be able to be more aware of this in ourselves, to be more aware of it in our kids, be more aware of it in other people, if we're going to be the people that others are willing to reach out to as a resource in order to bridge that shame gap.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're talking about creating a trusting relationship or trusting atmosphere. Because if especially if it's a child, if the child even just a whiff of distrust to their parents, Like, I told my dad this secret, even if it's really dumb. Like, I like unicorns. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
And then if she finds out that the dad violated that, then it erodes that trust.
Yeah.
And then when there's something extremely important that happens, she's going to be like, well, he couldn't even keep that. So why am I going to approach him with that? And that's why I feel like trust is so important. So important that you have to really nourish a trusting atmosphere with not just your kids, but your spouse and your, those close to you. Because if trust gets violated, then yeah, I'm going to be more quiet around you. My kids are going to be more quiet around me, and they're not going to be willing to talk to me about really anything, let alone important stuff.
Dude, your connection between betrayal and shame and these things, that's friggin' textbook psychology, homie.
Okay, wow.
Good job.
Good job. Go Tom.
Yay!
No, in fact, I mean, there's a study I pulled up. I was, it's a fairly recent one. I went to a resource that I have, this Jim Hopper, who I've talked about on other podcasts, but
I don't know. You keep bringing him up.
I do. I keep.
I'm like, I got to read what he's doing or something.
Yeah, no, there's some good stuff. But I emailed him and said, hey, well, you got some stuff on shame, and he sent me some stuff, and some of the stuff was really cool, because I've been focused all my training and on, like I said, sexual abuse stuff, and kind of tied into, which we focus on shared responsibility in sexual abuse, right? That an offender, through engagement and grooming behaviors, makes the child feel a part of the abuse, and that they are, so often they'll ask for permission. Is this okay? Does this feel good? Right? That's a form of grooming, not just because of the physical barriers, but in creating preparing that shame once it does hit.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And so that's to really focus on, and anyway, why that is particularly damaging, because the goal of any offender isn't just to commit the offense, it's to get away with the offense.
Of course.
So how do you get away with the offense?
They're trying to protect themselves.
Yeah. Right. So you do what you can to make sure no one will tell. And so you start by targeting the child that no one will believe, someone who's particularly vulnerable, where there's a need, or there's already an existing shame, is a good place to start.
Yeah.
So let's not talk about shame maybe after the fact. Let's say if there's an immense level of shame related to something that then can then be used to add shame onto that, and not to add shame on it, but to use that in order to ingratiate yourself with a child, in order to, get to a point of manipulation and,
Yeah, it's really disturbing, dude. Yeah. I think I talked to you about this, but there was a story I was listening to on a podcast where a guy who, sounds like this is a stereotype, but it's real. He was talking about being molested by a Catholic priest for many, many years, who was a family friend as well. And the problem was this priest was so engaging and was doing all these tactics that you were just talking about, but also to the point where the priest was actually helping him find ways of severe enjoyment and orgasm and stuff like that, saying, see, you're enjoying this. Mm-hmm. So when he's an adult now and he's relaying all these thoughts or whatever, he's like, I was abused, but the problem is I was a participant. I enjoyed it as well. Right. I was climaxing. I was, he's like, how can I blame him when I was, in a lot of ways an equal participant? And he had to deal with kind of breaking that psychology out of his head. And holy crap, dude, what a mind fuck that is.
Yeah.
Because I don't even know. I don't even know where to start with even trying to talk about that. Like, oh man.
Well, let's start by considering the areas where our children are experiencing real shame about normal behaviors, or about behaviors that are just theirs. So I was thinking about a couple fairly benign instances of manners in which we just, so to me, it comes down to our inability or unwillingness to allow kids to navigate their own world and be who they are.
But how do you get that? How do you do that?
Well, I'll give you an example.
Okay.
Is, you know, we're a basketball family. You want to dance? Queer. That happens everywhere, man.
Yeah.
Right? We're a music family. What's wrong with you? The jokes, the sarcastic, it's the message is you're not like us.
Or you're not fitting this role that we have predetermined for you. Yeah.
We have predetermined what your role is. I say, you know, from day one, a child's, I feel like I'm starting to get passionate. Am I yelling at you, Tom?
No, you're sounding great, dude.
Okay. From day one, we don't even allow, especially amongst the religious children, we don't allow their soul even to belong to them, because there's a battle for their soul between the two gods, right? God and Satan.
Yeah.
And then we don't even give them their own minds, because immediately your mind is being monitored by someone else. And you have other people in your life who are able to discern what you're thinking and whether you're good or bad. And then they become extensions of God, of the family, of the church, of the school, of the team.
Yeah.
That continues on. They're never themselves, and it's generally it's so effective by using shame principles, shame concepts, shame feelings to get them into line and ultimately stay quiet. How many kids are willing to stand up to their parents and say, I'm not doing basketball, I'm not doing sports, I want to do drama, right? It's that concept has become cliche in, you know, cinema and in TV shows, right? Of that type of a thing, but it's a real thing tied to shame. And so I think we start there asking the kid, really, what do you want to do for you? Not, you're going to do what I want for you.
I think what we also, as a culture, and especially religious cultures, like you're saying, I think what we do, we take away or we don't give children enough opportunity to make choices on their own anyway, in anything, because we know better. And like Matt was saying, if it's religious, then God knows better, and these are the rules. But with little simple decision-making skills, as kids learn that, well, and then I think as a culture, then they make bad mistakes, and then it's, you know, shame on you, and you did this wrong. Instead of, wait, now let's talk about why this didn't go well. Let's teach instead of make them feel a lot of shame. So instantly, I think as children, and I can relate to this. You stop trusting yourself because of the shame that's already in there, and also then the what if I don't want to make this one wrong because I don't want to feel bad, and then as adults, no wonder we cannot function and make choices.
We start. You're right. We already start with a default level of shame that is just so self-imposed, and then it's opened up like, you know, with steroids by our parents and family members and other cultural, you know, and upbringing kind of concepts, particularly religious. Yeah, other children.
Other children who are going through the same thing and want to put blame on you. I don't want anyone to know that I'm doing that, so yell at you.
I feel so much shame, so I want to try to make you feel more shame, so hopefully people won't shame me. Right? It's
crazy cycle.
It's this constant thing. So I think that's how we fight against it. And so that's why I talk about the small issues of making your kid have the decision of what to do with their own bodies. You know, you let them make the decision. And so, you know, a great example is, you know, uncle, grandma, and grandpa, right? This kid does not want to sit on grandpa's lap, does not want to sit on uncle's lap. Maybe it's for a reason. Maybe it's just because I don't really know that guy very well and I'm not feeling it, or I just don't want to be picked up and touched and hugged and cuddled right now.
I think you're onto something, and I think this is great. But the thing is there needs to be more than just educating the child. Because the grandma and grandpas, and I'm thinking of my own family,
sure,
where they can even be a little bullyish by saying, "Get over here and give your grandma a hug. Get over here, and then the kid starts crying, like, "Get over here!"
Now we're in shame, right?
Right,
double shame.
So then everyone's like, hurry and hug them before they keep us. So
right. No, just hug them. Just end this.
Making this weird. Yeah, right.
But it's always the kid who has to acquiesce to the adults. Always.
I know
and
because
then of course they don't trust the adult because they're the ones telling me to hug them.
Now are we in some betrayal? Why did my dad make me do that? I didn't want to do that. And they're absolutely. So yes, it does it requires education to the kid but it requires buy-in from parents.
Right.
And to implement. So one of the things, like, I'll put a high five up there or something like that, and the kid doesn't want to, and you get the parent that always says, give him a high five. I always look at the parent and say, or no, actually, I will always look at the kid and I say, you never have to give me a high five if you don't want to. I give them permission. So I do continue to talk to the dad, hopefully by modeling that it'll send a message to the parent. So, but these are, I say these are advanced moves, but they shouldn't be, because when I say what I just said, I suspect most people out there are going to say, well, yeah, of course that makes sense. Because what you're doing is you're arming your kids with the principle of being able to make decisions with their own body.
Right.
But I think it starts on these small little levels in the way that we just won't accept kids. How much stupid shaming do we do about what people choose to eat or wear or the way, the movies they watch, is we start becoming, hey, have you watched this movie? Oh yeah, it sucks. And you're like, oh gosh, I really liked it. Now maybe there's something wrong with me. Or you're in a fight. Wait, you have to like it too. Now you're in this kind of, but it's a stupid example, but it's a real one that happens all the time, especially when people are already prone to be sensitive to some of these self-doubt, shame experiences, and especially with kids who are already vulnerable and not resilient to the outside world.
Yeah. It's all about power struggles and modes of control.
Yeah.
Because it's yeah. I don't know, man. I was thinking of an experience when Kristin was talking earlier, because my wife's a kindergarten teacher as well, and she was talking about this scenario where there's 2 or 3 boys out on recess, and for some reason it was dick sharing time, so they all took their penises out, and they're all like, "Hey, I've got one. You got one? Yeah, I've got one.
I want to.
Look at this." And as a teacher or a chaperone or whatever, you're in a very delicate situation, because you could instantly turn that into a shameful thing or even awkward or whatever. Instead, it's like, okay, boys, guess what? Every boy has one. Not a big deal. Put them away. Okay. Just keep them to yourselves. You know what they're used for when in the bathroom, blah, blah, blah. And if you play it off as like it's not a big deal, then it's not a shameful thing. But if you're like, what are you guys doing? Yeah. Go to the principal's office. Right. Quit touching yourselves. Quit showing that to other people. Call the parents in and blah, blah, blah. And it becomes this big scene. And then, shame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gosh.
And, I think particularly in the Mormon context, or I should say in the religious context, because this is why, I think the connection between, what's so interesting is, the studies that have been on pornography as an addiction, that's completely been debunked, sort of. The studies are showing that there are real problems with kind of addictive problems with pornography, but it's directly proportional. It's directly tied to the religiosity of the person and not, pornography per se. So that's tied to the shame cycle, the shame, well, it is, but the shame expressions and the impact that it has on, it has negatively on interpersonal issues and on health and wellness.
Yeah. And same could be said with masturbation, but
I think it's good for health and wellness. But
it depends on who you're asking.
Oh, if you're okay, the same. I'm with you. Following, tracking. I don't know, man. The other research I heard was 21 emissions a month. So it's for healthy prostate. You're supposed to
set a goal.
You're supposed to have 21 ejaculations a month for ideal prostate health. So
if you're at 67, you're a little high.
Okay. Apparently, high is fine. You just don't.
High is fine. All right. All right.
You can overshoot. You just don't want to undershoot. Otherwise, we should shame you.
Yeah, right. All those Kleenexes you go through.
Yes,
oh my
yes.
gosh.
We're gonna make a chart and hang it on the wall so everyone knows
That's
exactly.
right.
Yeah, right.
That's,
Look at all those dates.
I used to hate those things. I'm like, don't show everyone we're gonna. Not in this competition. I'm not very good at this one.
But certainly, high levels of sin concepts and the need for repentance concepts are going to relate to high levels of shame. Mm-hmm. High levels of shame are going to make a child particularly vulnerable anyway, susceptible to manipulation, and then will have even more experiences of shame, which will contribute, even contribute more to helplessness, hopelessness, and silence perpetually. And so what I wish I would have said many, 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 many times is that the chastity lessons and the manner in which the Mormon Church approaches sexuality, that is the problem. And that is a problem because the manner in which it makes kids vulnerable to shame, makes them experience actual shame, which makes them vulnerable to grooming behaviors, vulnerable to sexual abuse because of all those kind of predispositions as a result of the chastity lessons. And then it relates to the silence and the less likely a kid is to tell. And so this is why I say the Mormon Church or fundamentalist religions are particularly set up to allow offenders to flourish and to make children and victims particularly vulnerable.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, because even in the several conversations that we've had about this around Sam Young and everything, it sounds like, there's these dominoes that fall, and then in the center of the dominoes is the actual, predator victim scenario.
Sure.
But if you go back, like what you're saying, these, if we go 8 to 12 dominoes back, now we can look at this shaming behavior and say, if you really want to stop the actual traumatic experience, we've got to look, 8, 10 dominoes back and say, all right, look at this, and I think it's incredible to hyper focus on that, but it's so difficult. Right? Well, because everybody always wants like one clean answer. Like,
this is, for me, this is a little bit of a clean answer because you don't have to just intervene 8 dominoes back. You don't have to start from the beginning to still have real intervention and impact on reducing these risk variables, these vulnerability variables, I guess, right? You can intervene at any point.
Right. That's totally true.
And so, but by being aware of these, it gives people the tools, in particular the kids, hopefully to have access to the resources to develop the resiliency in order to stop this cycle. So it's because my goal is just, it can't be to stop trauma, it can't be to stop abuse, and it can't be to stop sexual abuse. Because if that was my goal, I'd go mad because it will never happen.
Right.
But we can reduce the instances of it and reduce how perpetuating it is, right? How persistent it can be with a particular victim, and reduce the instances and get to a place of having more disclosures and more intervention so that people aren't suffering in silence for so long. So I think that's the goal. And so rather than saying, if the sexual abuse happened or if any of these traumas happened, then, we failed. No, we haven't failed. In fact, we have opportunities to succeed even when sexual abuse has happened, because we can contribute to reducing the shame of those experiences that will help reduce the traumas and the negative PTSD experiences later by giving kids a voice, by providing more opportunities and more spaces for them to feel safe, secure, and comfortable in coming forward. So let me go to the bishop's interviews.
Which, can I say something really fast? I like what you said, because if we can teach that and children disclose sooner, of course it's going to lighten many other times it would have just kept going on, and the deeper, you're right.
So success isn't in just preventing abuse. Success is in giving victims a voice and reducing the shame and helping them break out of the cycle. And so I see someone like McKenna Denson, who has absolutely been empowered by finding a voice after being in that certainly shame cycle for so incredibly long. And I see a number of my kids that, have had to testify, and I've seen them walk into a courtroom with one demeanor and walking out as a different kid. It's there's a connection between speaking, disclosing, and reducing that shame, especially if you can find somebody who receives that information in a way that isn't shameful. We have to acknowledge that and be aware of the reality of that, how hard it is for anyone to tell about their, any sexual experience, even a positive one. I mean, my gosh, we are shamed about, how many women are out there? Women are shamed for experiencing orgasm or anything they do sexually. Now, add a religious context, add some of the the chastity lessons and the sexual lessons that have permeated. It contributes to unhealthy expressions, and especially unhealthy expressions with other people.
Yeah.
But I think there's hope. And the hope is to be more and more aware of this. The times when we experience it, the time that, we can also do as much as possible to not make our kids feel shame for being them. So let me give you another example I was thinking about the other day. And I think a lot of times it so often happens with, some form of religion. And so, I think of parents who shame their kids for wanting to eat meat if they're not in a meat eating home, if their parents are vegan or vegetarian. I mean, those are other forms of ways where we shame our kids all the time because they don't adopt our view of the world or the way that we've decided that it works for us to navigate the world. We just have such a difficult time when our kids take steps that are different than that to navigate theirs.
Yeah, we as parents, we have to stop trying to put our kids in certain roles or predetermined roles and just let them choose for themselves.
Yeah.
I fight this all the time, and it's been one of the best things that's ever happened to me is when I just relinquished any form of control and just let my kids choose what they want to choose. If they're going to play soccer, if they're going to play the piano, they would gravitate towards swim or music or whatever it is, and I had to be conscious enough to say, yeah, Tom, you want your kids to play football or whatever sports or whatever. But once I kind of gave that up and say, I can tell when my kid is enjoying something and when they're not.
Yeah.
And that's all I really want them to do is just enjoy themselves. So yeah, quit. Why am I trying to impose something on them? Just let them be.
I like, Tom, that you said that you let your kids choose. I think the best thing that we could do for kids is let them choose all the time. And people then ask me, so you just let them make all the choices? And I'm like, no, you can give them choices that you want, but you let them choose. And I learned this years ago because we raised some pretty stubborn kids, and it really, watching them gain their self-authority.
Yeah.
Even when they're in trouble, fine, then you can do this, or this. You need to choose one right now, or I'm going to choose. Just little things like that build the child's self-confidence in making decisions and we now as parents can say, we know this works. We've seen it, just like you just said, Tom, but it's hard to teach.
It is, and it also takes mental energy to do it as an adult. It's so much easier to do what I say because I don't want to have the conversation with you. And I understand the realities of that, and I certainly experienced it. What I'm suggesting is at some point to have the conversation with them, right? And part of the conversation is, tell me about your world. Tell me how you see things.
Yeah.
Why is it that you want to do this?
And also that something that you'd mentioned earlier where you said, your body is your body. You have control over it. You get to say, if someone wants to hug you, you don't have to hug them. You don't have to let anyone touch you. You don't have to hold someone's hand. And even when it comes to family, that message keeps resonating in my head over and over and over again. As when I was a kid, how valuable that would have been to just know, your body is yours. No one else's, yours.
Yep.
And just reiterate that message over and over and over again until it sinks in and they really believe it. And then they act on it. Like, this is my body. If grandma wants a hug, I'm not going to give her a hug. And if I'm going to do this, and, there's just certain elements of ownership that they take. I think
I walked by my daughter the other day and just kind of flicked her, gave her one of those, those love smacks or whatever, and she's like, "Hey, don't do that." I said, "I'll do that if I want to." She's like, "My body." I was like, "You know what? You're right. Sorry."
That's good.
But anyway.
But it took me. I'm 44, and I now can confidently be like, I'm wearing whatever shirt I want to the grocery store. I have felt shame even in, I better not wear this because people might see like side boob or some stupid thing. I don't care. Well, if I don't care, I'm 44 and I can finally do that. Like, why was it my fault if a man in the grocery store wants to look at my boobs while I'm grocery shopping? Like, I'm sorry.
That's his problem.
Boobs, but
that's his issue. Not yours.
So, but that was something ingrained and taught in me. Like, I had to be careful of that. That is a simple way that shame affects adults too. Yeah. And so of course, when we tell our kids, "Oh, don't wear that." Well,
why?
What are we telling them then? Yeah.
Yeah. So if there's a reason, let's talk about that. And let's say, why do you want to wear that? What is it? I just wish we could spend more time asking open-ended questions of our kids. Tell me about that. Tell me about your world.
Such great advice.
To me, that's what we're doing, is trying to give kids a space to interpret and communicate their world.
Yeah.
And make them free to do both. How uncomfortable we are with silences with our kids when you ask them a question. And now we start feeding them information. Well, they're thinking. They're thinking. I love silence between kids after a question, and then to get that response that was just authentic.
That is such a good
But we don't let them go through their own process enough because we're so used to our own roles of, "How are you?" "Well, what'd you do today?" "Nothing." "What did you?" We're uncomfortable with these. We don't even take the time to process ourselves, and we don't model that behavior in our kids.
That's so valuable. I mean, I was just thinking of a scenario where my daughter wanted to dye her hair purple. And I remember my wife just kind of getting a little triggered by saying, "Why would you want to do that? That's so stupid. And there's going to be so many people that are going to make comments or whatever." And not to toot my own horn or whatever, but I went up to her and I said, "I think purple's a great choice. If you wanted to go pink, that's cool too. If I had hair, I would have wanted to dye it too." And just kind of just build off that, because you're right, Matt. Just let them let them have the chance to talk about what their world is, what they're experiencing. Yeah. Because I knew that my daughter, there must be some reason she'd want to dye her hair and kind of go all punk or whatever. And I was curious about that, but I'm not interested in shaming her and not, kind of bullying her by saying, "What a stupid thing to do. Why would you do that?" And that's the typical sort of parental experience. Like, "You're not going to dye your hair. That's so stupid. Why would you do that?" Instead of saying, "Why would you want to dye your hair? And why would you want to choose that color?" If you ask that, then you'll get information, valuable information as to what's going on. Maybe, their best friend dyed their hair. Maybe that's it. Maybe they want to get attention from this boy that likes his color. Any number of things, but you're never going to get that information if you shut them down and shame them.
Yeah. Or if you inject what you think are the reasons why they're doing whatever they're doing.
Right. Or control them and put them in a role. Yeah.
And it happens too often.
And I think it provides opportunity then when they start to tell you about their life, times where I know we as parents can teach a little bit, like, oh, did you hear that? Let's just pre-teach this thing because we let them talk. And
it's so fun, especially modeling that as my youngest is, because it's been a while. It's not like we've always done this. This has been a work in progress. It's been, for 20 some years of Kristin being a teacher and, 15 years of me working with kids, that we finally started kind of getting more comfortable with it with our own kids,
with each other.
And that's a good point.
We let each other.
Shut up, Kristin.
We really did start allowing each other to think, and sometimes it takes me a while to match my words with what's in my brain, and you give me time for that instead of me have the feeling like I have to have an answer like this. That also causes a little bit of shame, because why did I not I said the wrong thing. If we're teaching that in kids, then that's the adult they will be. So I know that we tried now to communicate that way with adults as well.
Yeah.
I really do want to hear what people have to say. I don't want them to regurgitate my thoughts. I already had my thought. I want to hear other people's reasoning. And I think we need to do that. I think that, but if we do that more with adults and as adults, it will be easy to do that with our children.
100%.
Easier. Still hard.
90% of adults are just overgrown kids anyways.
Oh, absolutely.
We are kids. I'm only 44.
Still,
I got a lot of stuff to learn still.
Yeah.
and so this is well. So let me get into the bishop's interviews and confession interviews. Any of these fundamentalist religions where you have to go to tell them, because the voyeur God in your head 100% of the time isn't enough. We now have to externalize this blame and shame by, having this manifestation of this person who's kind of a stranger, to talk about these things as well. So that is where the shame wizard. So that's what we should call these bishops. They're the shame wizards that now really ratchet down on this already existing shame as a result of every chastity lesson and, and every misdeed and every, I thought about a boob. And so is that sinful? And now let's look at a situation of sexual abuse, and let's look about sexual abuse where it's a particularly intimate offender, a father, an uncle, a brother, right? Another church member. There is no way that they have the resiliency to tell that motherfucker. Right. But what is happening is that shame is being just, I don't know what the analogy is, but just opened up and released, because now they're saying, did you do, these things? And they're thinking, oh my gosh, yes. And now that, the inability to tell for all those reasons and the reminder of, oh my gosh, I contributed to this, or I did this too, that shame is just ratcheted down to a point of, if that kid was ever going to tell before, they're probably not.
Or even if the kid had no experience in that shame department, now there is shame,
right.
Now there is that trauma there.
So to me, that's the particular connection, and why it makes sense for people to say, no, it is connected to sexual abuse. It is in those ways, but not in the ways that are being articulated by some of the groups out there. And that's why I said, you stop bishops' interviews tomorrow, you do nothing to impact sexual abuse. That's why.
That makes sense.
Yeah. That does.
So the good news is there are ways, there are resources for people to work on that shame those feelings of shame, not just expecting other people to intervene. And I'm gonna attach a couple articles, some of the articles, and I'll attach some of the clips and stuff related to shame. But there's something called compassionate mind training for people with high shame and self-criticism. And it's an overview of this study that was done about trying to help patients explore acceptability, understanding, abilities to utilize and practice compassion for themselves. These types of, this sounds like real self-help stuff, right? But, connected to CBT type therapies and these things, it can help individuals develop more resiliency from shame, which helps heal from some of those traumas and PTSD. So I'll attach that article as well and provide some other resources. I think this is why people talk about mindfulness, yoga, meditation is because, spending time with yourself, not in scripts and not in dramas and not in roles, contributes to less feelings of shame and more feelings of self-acceptance, love. And I think the more we get to know ourselves, the more we are to really know and connect with other people.
I was thinking about your experience about I'm going to wear whatever I want to wear. And I think my wife in particular has made a drastic change when she stopped wearing garments. And it's such a silly thing. But when
it's not.
Well, I mean, I guess because it's your underwear or whatever. But when she made that change, like, she became so fashion conscious and she started wearing things intentionally, things that made her feel good. And she stopped giving a fuck about what other people thought for the most part. And I actually started to see this huge change in her where she was starting to feel way better about who she was and more comfortable in her own skin, which in turn makes her way more attractive, right? Because now it's like you said, Matt, I'm seeing a different version of her that she's kind of kept at bay or keep hidden or even just not let out. And it's so beautiful to see. Like today she was wearing this gorgeous dress that was just cut right off here. And in a lot of ways it's so shameful to wear that around here because she's announcing, oh, guess what? I'm not wearing garments.
Yeah.
But she just doesn't care.
It's so great. I'm so proud of her. Awesome. She did it fast. She's badass.
Awesome. She's pretty awesome. But yeah, and that's the most attractive part. I've told her that, but when I see her wear that and I just see she's like, if people are going to judge me, fuck them.
No, it's
awesome.
It's getting unleashed out of those garmies. It's like a little cage, but it's that, like you said, finally finding the confidence within ourselves, all of us, to make a choice and not, I know that sounds silly, that what to wear, but not what everyone else is telling you what to wear. It goes in any part of your life, but
well,
finding confidence and trusting, like, well, I'm not stupid. It's not like I'm going to wear clothes.
Most of the time.
So why would anyone else care? I know it's just such a silly thing, but it is.
But it's a real thing.
It is. And letting go of that shame and finally feeling confident and happy. Oh, good for your life.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but that's that when you were talking about that, to me, I just want to applaud because when people make that external shift because they've been working internally, I'm going to be comfortable with who I am, and it's going to show all the way out to what I wear. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So shame is a thing, and it's a thing we're all battling against, but particularly the vulnerable. In my world, which is a, kind of a multidisciplinary intersection of child development, law, psychology, trauma, those types of things. I think there are the three, if I had to pick a three, and I'm subject to change, is trauma, shame, and resiliency. And that those three things are contributing, either the lack of those things or the acuteness of those things are what's contributing so much to to a lack of health and wellness of the self. So many interpersonal issues of depression and and various negative responses that are resulting in addictions and in other destructive and unhealthy behavior, suicide, and those types of things. So shame, trauma, and resiliency. And the more we can address those and develop the tools and resources to develop those for us and those around us, the more healthy we'll be, the more connected we'll be, that we'll find higher levels of intimacy, higher levels of self-satisfaction. Life's hard enough. But we make it so much harder on ourselves. And more importantly, we make it so much harder on our kids than we really need to intend to. Let's do it for the kids.
Exactly. Build them up, give them the self-confidence and self-esteem that, that they're still trying to figure out for themselves. So like you said, the resiliency to be able to ward off all these shameful things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think, man? I gave you a shotgun at the beginning. Did it work out for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's still something, we could spend episodes talking about.
Yeah. And we will. So now we get into the weeds with examples, not just about sexual abuse, but about the human condition, which is trying to find peace from a burdened mind, trying to find self-authority, trying to find our authentic self so that we can find connections, not just with ourselves, but with other people. Because, the biggest thing is, I was thinking about the idea of blending in, right? I want to blend in.
Like what? Become invisible? What are you talking about?
No. Well, and I think it's tied to shame in many ways, right?
You're talking about like fitting in.
Fitting in, right? I want to blend in. Oh, I wish I had people that I could blend in with, right? That seems to be, this I don't want to be alone.
Right.
And it's tied to this shame thing. But I was thinking about, blending is that too often we just want to blend for blending's sake. I just don't want to be alone. And so we find, not the most healthy environments for us just because we'd rather be alone. But instead, if we can find instances where we blend authentically with our environment, right, with our healthy environments, we're going to find people that maybe don't belong in our lives as much as they are. We're going to find other people who do. And I think in many instances, we'll find more comfort and peace with even being alone. I think. And I think that's the goal.
Sounds like you're speaking from experience, but yeah.
I mean, I'm speaking from my experience, and I'm seeing other people that have done that as well, and seeing instances where when that's not happening, people find such dissatisfaction and experience new traumas and new shame and new experiences that contribute to PTSD. And the thing about PTSD is it's not just PTSD, it's active trauma. And we're experiencing that sometimes perpetually and too often exponentially because the past shame stays and new traumas contribute to new shames that just add on top of the old shames. And the weighty burdens of these things that compile up over time can become debilitating. So we've got to let that shit go.
Break the cycle.
Break the cycle. So part of the things I think we'll be talking about are some of the tools and resources to accomplish that, and not just shine a light and say, hey, this is really bad and here's the problems, but here's maybe some real examples of how to have interventions in our own lives. And so one is this compassionate mind training sounds really interesting. Others talking, I think, openly and authentically with each other. In ways, you and I have interacted and talked in different ways over the last few months than we have in the past. We've been more vulnerable about things that, maybe usually men we hide or we keep down. But, in many ways, you and I basically approaching each other, being like, I don't know what to do with some of these things.
Yeah, it is weird, right? It's I don't know. I think it's really, really cool more than it's weird, but it's a little weird.
Cool.
It provides such, I've seen.
It provides resiliency. It assists with that resiliency.
And and deeper connections where you naturally, I think, then would feel safe to ever talk about anything that's shameful. Mm-hmm. Which like we've always talked about our communication as a couple. It's because we really did. I always trusted you. I could tell you stuff. So I didn't have that, like, who do I can't tell anyone. I can't imagine not having anyone to tell. And so many adults and kids that you're telling us are living that way. So I guess if we just, can find ourselves and naturally start surrounding ourselves with people that we connect with.
Look, and let's extend this further. The shame stuff I'm talking about here certainly relates to the manner in which LGBT kids. I mean, everything that I've just talked about, now apply it to being an LGBT kid in the Mormon Church.
Yeah, that's a can of worms, dude.
But it's the same thing, right?
It is the same thing.
I would like to withdraw my resignation from Infants on Thrones.
So you did pull a Randy. You
totally pulled a Randy. Two things. But I realized, I had the idea, I'm doing this other podcast where we're talking more about this type of stuff. But, Infants on Thrones has some listeners that have heard a lot about my journey up to this point. And Kristin and I want to talk about our journey, our spiritual journey over the last few years. That's kind of not about the journey as much as just some of the things that we've come to learn together about relationships, about parenting, about marriage and intimacy and communication. And there's a larger story to be told that I'd like to tell, and we'd kind of like to explore. And I think Infants on Thrones is a great place for that, to provide maybe greater context for some of the things that we're going to be talking about on the other podcast, which is whatweknowpod.com. So that's kind of what we want to do, continue to do is be able to have maybe a more authentic and intimate conversations about our life here on Infants on Thrones with people who have become friends. And to that end, I said I don't give a shit what listeners have to say about my tone, but on these type of topics, I want more than anything to know what the listeners have to say, because what I know is they are absolute experts on their experiences of shame and trauma and resiliency and communication and intimacy. And I think we all have something to learn from each other if we'll listen. I want to start a discussion group to start having conversations about these topics and to hear about what listeners think about shame, not so that we can, or I should say the reason of that is to get to use each other as resources to get closer to access to information that will help all of us. And I think I can learn more about shame and all these things and about health and wellness by hearing what other people think and have learned and have experienced in their lives. And that, we can all kind of teach each other and really develop a school of teachers, rather than a school of prophets. And to me, a school of teachers just means a school of healers. And so, yeah, man, I want to know what the listeners have to say about this topic, because they've demonstrated real thoughtfulness and perspective and openness on a lot of topics. And so let's stop just talking maybe about ex-Mormonism and talking about the human condition.
I'm in.
What do you think?
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, except for those jackass listeners, you know who you are.
Well, yeah, there's a few out there.
You know who you are.
But come to find out, when we take a few minutes and try to heal our own brains, and then start listening to other adults, like you guys are saying, the listeners and the listeners' comments, friends, people you run into, it only broadens my perspective and helps me think. And my main goal, obviously my career of 22 years of teaching, is the kids. And I really do see us adults as, like you said earlier, Tom, big kids. We're doing our fucking best trying to figure this life out, just like kids are. So I'm probably blabbing now, but the more
you're 100%
we can help each other and be vulnerable and just talk real shit and help each other out as adults.
Yep.
And apologize when we've said shitty things, and all this stuff helps us be vulnerable and real. And I think all it can do is spread more love and help kids. So
it's not simple to say that most days I don't recognize me with these shoes and this apron, that place and its patrons have taken more than I gave them. It's not easy to know I'm not anything like I used to be, although it's true I was never attention sweet center. I still remember that girl. She's imperfect, but she tries. She is good, but she lies. She is hard on herself. She is broken and won't ask for help. She is messy, but she's kind. She is lonely most of the time. She is all of this mixed up and baked in a beautiful pie. She is gone, but she used to be mine. And you're not what I asked for. Sometimes life just slips in through a back door. It carves out a person and makes you believe it's all true. And now I've got you. And you're not what I asked for. If I'm honest, I know I would give it all back for a chance to start over and rewrite an ending or two. For the girl that I knew who'll be reckless just enough, who'll get hurt, but who learns how to toughen up when she's bruised and gets used by a man who can't love. And then she'll get stuck and be scared of the life that's inside her, growing stronger each day, to finally remind her to fight just a little, to bring back the fire in her eyes that's been gone but used to be mine. Used to be mine. She is messy, but she's kind. She is lonely most of the time. She's all of this mixed up and baked in a beautiful pie. She is gone, but she used
muffins on thrones.